Hello, and welcome to another episode of Virtual Legality. I'm your host, Richard Hoeg, managing member of the Hoeg Law business law firm of Northville, Michigan. And today we're not going to talk so much about law, but we are going to talk about business because Sony, one of the big name players in the console video game space, has finally deigned to grace us with the visual aesthetic of their next generation console, the PlayStation 5. And what does it look like? It looks like that. I don't know what to say, really. In all honesty, this kind of aesthetic surprised me because I thought we were moving more towards a general uniformity, an understanding that people have to put these boxes somewhere in their living rooms or in their basements or in their bedrooms, underneath their TVs, where people can see them, where somebody walking by doesn't have to go, oh my God, what is that? And maybe that's what Sony wants. As you can see from the thumbnail, I believe this is Sony kind of getting back to some of the errors of their ways. The PlayStation 3 era of the Sony video game experience was not a good one. It saw them at the peak of their dominance in the PlayStation 2 era, and in that dominance, making decisions, making choices that really didn't wind up benefiting the company, their video game developers, or the people that love video games. And while I think we are hearing the right things from the PlayStation 5 reveal, that we are hearing that developers apparently like developing for this thing, we definitely didn't see a lot of evidence of real excitement, a lot of extra games, a lot of extra ideas, something that looks like the next generation in this afternoon's presentation. And I do think, as much as I might joke about how the PlayStation is now popping its collar 80s style, or how it looks like a duckbill on its side with a mouth guard, I don't think that's the end of the story. It's just indicative of what I think Sony is doing. Now, if you're new to Virtual Legality, we've had a lot of new subscribers in the last couple weeks, and you haven't seen me talk about these kinds of things. We do talk about business, but I love video games. I love pop culture. I love examining these things from various angles. And I have played a lot of Sony games. I've had every PlayStation. I was there day one for the original PlayStation. I still remember Battle Arena Toshinden and Jumping Flash and those good times. And so I think you've seen me over the past couple of months talk about how I think Microsoft has a more clear, concise vision for what they see out of the video game sphere, and Sony hasn't so far. Now that we are seeing that vision kind of articulated, I still have a lot of questions, but I'm not anti-Sony. I'm not a console warrior. I am blessed enough to be able to buy all the consoles that I need. I'm going to almost certainly get a PlayStation 5, if only to play the exclusives that they have available. But I can still sit here this afternoon in June of 2020 and say, overall, I wasn't impressed. Now, if you have been in this space, you know in March I actually wound up doing a video asking if the PlayStation 5 was too exotic. And I posited this question, whether it was too much like the PlayStation 3, whether we were seeing certain signals, certain noises about the Sony of old kind of getting back to their ways of not arrogance necessarily, but overconfidence in what it is that they can bring to market, what they can be successful with, and what their competitors are going to do. Now, the impetus behind that particular video was the notion that we were seeing reports that they were doing all sorts of wacky stuff with how they were going to handle memory load, how they were going to handle power load, what exactly was going to happen in this architecture, and how Mark Cerny had all these thoughts that were designed to help developers, but certainly seemed like things that wouldn't be easily thought of by third-party developers, third-party publishers, that somebody that was making something for the PC and the Xbox, and yes, the Switch, might not be able to use all these bells and whistles that the Sony PlayStation 5 had put in their box. Very similar to what happened with the PlayStation 3, where the cell processor just was almost never utilized by any company that wasn't specifically owned by Sony, and even then, only at the end of the PlayStation 3 lifecycle. Now, I very much hope that this speculative analysis is wrong. I want all of these consoles to succeed. I want all of the games to be great. I want all of our experiences to be immersive, to be entertaining, and to be fun. But I do worry, and certainly the look of the new console is something that doesn't exactly ease that worry. It sounds silly, right? You're talking about popped collars and white on black and a very different look as being somehow emblematic of the philosophy behind the console. But I think in certain respects it is. Sony is out there loud and proud saying, we don't care what you think about what this looks like. Half of you are going to think it looks cool. Half of you are not. But that's okay. And I'm not sure that it is. What we are experiencing right now in 2020 with pandemics and unrest and everything else means that we are going to be much more cautious about our leisure expenses. I know I am. I could have told you last year that I was almost certainly going to get both consoles day and date, and then we'd see where the chips fell as to what was better, and we'd worry about that then. As of right now, I am pretty cautiously leaning on only one console this holiday season, and really, that one console is far more likely to be the Xbox because I understand their vision. I understand what Game Pass is. I understand how they have articulated that they are essentially building a really, really strong personal computer that will connect directly to your TV and get rid of some of the frustration and friction points of the PC gaming experience. A lot of people come into my social media and comments to my videos and say, hey, Rick, you don't need an Xbox if you have a great PC. And I have a pretty good PC, but I love the console experience. I love not having to deal with dials and think about all these various different ways of optimizing how my PC makes games look. And I like that being taken out of my hands. I like being able to sit on my couch, sit on my comfy chair, and play something on my big TV with my surround sound, which is not something that I can emulate in the PC gaming space. So I look at the Xbox and say, I understand what you're about. Sony, I'm looking forward to knowing more. And yes, Sony says, hey, we've got an SSD. That's pretty cool, Sony. I like that. A solid state drive is going to be interesting. It's going to do what you say it's going to do with respect to load times, at least in the games that you make. I do have questions about if I want to purchase Assassin's Creed. The Xbox tells me I can purchase it right now, and I can play it on the Xbox Series X, no problem. And you say, maybe we'll figure something out. And also, will Ubisoft be using your SSD in the same way that maybe you can? Are they going to be using the way that your weird system allocates power in the maximal amount that they can? Or is the Xbox and its greater horsepower and higher specs just going to be able to blow things out of the water just from brute force? And I suspect strongly, having watched this industry for a long time, that will be the end result. That the box that looks like a refrigerator and is a rectangle and doesn't offend but also doesn't enlighten, doesn't make people excited, will through brute force probably be delivering more and better graphics more often. But that's not the end of the story, right? Sony did come out and say a whole bunch of things. They've got the 3D audio feature. They've got the SSD feature. One of the things I was looking for was what they were thinking about doing with backward compatibility. And they really weren't able to answer that. They said a huge portion of the PlayStation 4 games are likely to be able to run no problem on the PlayStation 5. But that's not really the same as the Xbox initiative of having their Game Pass, having their backwards compatibility, having everything go back to the original Xbox generation, etc. So what I see is a Sony that is scrambling around a little bit. They've got what they think is a sexy-looking machine. They've got an SSD concept that they think is new and interesting. They've got things like 3D audio. And then when you go and you actually look at the games that they announced this afternoon, they're all sequels or all licensed properties or all things that you already knew. Spider-Man. Absolutely loved Spider-Man. If you go back and you look at my 2018 Game of the Year videos, you will see Spider-Man at number 3. Loved that game. But 2 years later, they've got some type of Spider-Man game called Miles Morales. Very interesting to look at. Is it a full game? Is it an expansion? 2 years is a pretty quick turnaround for a AAA game. They will undoubtedly describe it as a full game, but I'm holding my breath. I want to see exactly what that experience looks like. Ratchet and Clank, we've been there before. In fact, I love Ratchet and Clank, but I have played a ton of Ratchet and Clank. Gran Turismo, Horizon, all of these things that we already saw, that we have already seen, we are just continuing the current generation, certainly at least on the PlayStation ecosystem. And hey, I like the PlayStation 4. I like a good third-person action-adventure as much as anyone, but you don't have to have every studio in your portfolio making some version of the same game. And that's really where I come out on this. I love Sony. I love PlayStation. Can't even say the words. And I will undoubtedly buy a PlayStation 5 at some point. But AAA gaming, and Sony in particular, is really starting to lean on the same type of game experience in a way that I don't love. In a very big surprise to me, the indie game showcase that I watched on the Escapist mag, and I highly recommend checking it out. Sorry I didn't pull it up here for purposes of this video, was far more energetic, far more exciting, far more interesting to a guy like me than seeing the AAA parade. Seeing a lot of different ways to third-person kill someone. Hey, I'm all about that on occasion as well, but it does seem like we're getting a bit myopic, a bit linear, a bit tunnel-visioned in our approach to game design when you pour untold amounts of dollars into the project. I have no doubt that God of War 2 will be the same way, but if you look at something like that, the evolution of God of War was to take something that was different and to make it a third-person over-the-shoulder action game. That is what Sony makes. And don't get me wrong, Xbox had a terrible generation this generation. There was virtually no exclusive that I wanted to play on the Xbox, with maybe the exception of some Insomniac game, who now is, of course, owned by Sony. But that being said, Xbox has clearly seen the error of their ways, have been spending money and more money on top of that to try to acquire studios. And frankly, the studios that they have acquired are interesting and unique. You've got your Obsidians. You've got various other folks that are doing other things that aren't necessarily just third-person action shooters, action melee, or whatever it might be. So when I look at something like this afternoon, and I know a lot of people are going to come into the comments to this video or come into my social media and say, hey, Rick, what are you talking about? That was great. We got an hour of game reveals, a lot of stuff we didn't know. I can only speak for me, and I am thrilled if you are excited about what you saw this afternoon. I personally would love to be there with you. I love games. I've loved games my whole life. But I do miss an era where we saw first-party studios doing weird and different things. And I'm sure you'll come up with a few examples of the times that they have done that. But it's only a few examples. It's not at all the norm. And almost every game that we see now from Sony is some variant on a third-person open-world action adventure. And while Xbox might be trying to build their own version of that, right now, seeing a company with a wildly disparate focus on a rectangle and on buying companies and on brute forcing the math behind putting good graphics on your screen and telling you how they're going to do it clearly, concisely, and with vision, just as a business guy, speaks more to me than what Sony's doing. I'm not a console warrior. I'm going to get these both. I've loved Sony for a long time. I don't actually have as positive a history with Microsoft and Xbox. All I can speak to is the communication. And in my opinion, the communication, the focus, the business model, and the future feels like it belongs to Xbox. This has been Virtual Legality for today. A lot of legality today, right? So we're talking about business. This is how I see things playing out. But overall, sometimes I just like to put my commentary out there. If you like these videos, we don't do these kinds of things that often. But what we do is talk about things like end-user license agreements, like those in Steam, which you can see on the current trailer to the channel, where we talked about whether or not a developer could swap out their entire game and still comply with the Steam terms and conditions. Spoiler alert, I don't think that they can. We've also talked about the way YouTube abuses arbitrary and vague rules and guidelines to their own benefit, and how the DMCA winds up hurting a whole bunch of platforms like Twitch and YouTube and Twitter because of the way that it is written and the way that it is used by copyright holders. So if any of those kinds of things sound interesting to you, please do check out the channel. Like, subscribe, share, tell people we are here. We love having these conversations. If you can't tell, I am passionate about this stuff, and I am very thankful for your joining me in the conversation. If you saw this on YouTube, thank you so much for watching. And if you listen to it as a podcast, thank you so much for listening. And I will catch you on the very next episode of Virtual Legality. Virtual Legality is a YouTube video series with audio podcast versions presented as commentary and for education and entertainment purposes only. It does not constitute legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. If you have legal questions about the topics discussed, please consult your own legal counsel.